In this lecture, we're going to start transitioning from one scene to another. If the player begins the game should switch from the main menu scene to the island scene. The first step in this process is to register our scenes with Unity. By default, Unity does not include your scenes with a game. We must explicitly add scenes to the build. The reason is simple. Sometimes, developers create sandbox scenes for testing features without needing an entire playable level. Other times, you may not want to export levels while they're in development. Unity requires developers to select which scenes will be part of the game. We can register a scene by navigating to File, Build Settings. At the top of the window, we are given a list of scenes in our game. As you can see, nothing is listed. We must add our scenes to this section. From the Project window, navigate to the Scenes folder. Next, drag the main menu and island scenes into this section. After adding the scenes, they've been assigned an index. We can reference scenes by their name or number. From my experience, I like to use the index. The order of scenes does matter. The first scene should be the main menu scene. If the index is 0, it'll be the first scene that loads when the player starts the game. If the index is not 0, that's fine. We can drag the scenes to change their indexes. Before moving forward, ensure the main menu scene's index is 0. The island scene should have an index of 1. After confirming the indexes, let's start loading the scenes. Let's create a class dedicated to switching scenes. In the Scripts directory, create a folder called Core. The idea of switching scenes is a core feature. Core features will be placed in a separate directory. Inside this directory, create a C# file called Scene Transition. Next, open this file with Visual Studio Code. We're going to change this class from a component to a static class. Transitioning to different scenes is not an action specific to a component. This class should not be tied to a specific component. I think outsourcing the logic into a static class is appropriate. Let's remove the namespaces from the file. Next, remove the mono behavior class. Afterward, remove the start and update methods. This class should be put into a namespace. Wrap the class with a namespace called rpg.core. I'm introducing a new namespace. This namespace will store classes related to the core features of our game. The last step is to convert the class into a static class. Add the static keyword after the public keyword. Our class is ready. We can start working on the logic for switching scenes. This task is relatively simple. Like most things, Unity provides a simple method for changing scenes. At the top of the file, add a namespace called unityengine.scenemanagement. This namespace has classes related to managing our scenes from loading scenes to merging them. In our class, let's define a public method for switching scenes. The name of the method will be called initiate. Let's add the static keyword to the method. Our class and method are static. Currently, we don't know which scene to switch to. We should accept the new scene as a parameter. Specifically, we're going to accept the index. Inside the method's parameter list, add an integer parameter called sceneIndex. As a reminder, scene indexes are stored as integers. Switching to a scene can be performed with its index. Next, inside the method, call the sceneManager.loadScene method with the sceneIndex parameter. The sceneManager class is defined by Unity. It has various methods for interacting with the scenes from our game. In this case, we're using the loadScene method to force a new scene to be loaded. This method accepts the name of the scene or the scene's index. The method is ready. Let's call it from the main menu state. Open this file in your editor. In the select button method, let's replace the debug statement with a conditional statement. We shouldn't transition into the new scene straight away. We must verify that the correct button was selected. If the player selects the Start button, we can start moving on to the next scene. The condition will be the following: button.name == Start button. If this condition evaluates to true, we can begin the transition process. For the condition, we're comparing the name stored in the button with the name we assigned to the Start button from the document. Before we do, we should include the core namespace. At the top of the file, add the rpg.core namespace. Back in the conditional statement, let's call the scene transition.initiate method. Lastly, pass in the index of the island scene. The index should be 1. You may be thinking, why are we defining our own class for switching scenes? Couldn't we have called the scene manager.loadScene method like so? Technically, yes. However, in a future lecture, we're going to add audio to our game. During transitions, we should fade the game's audio. It's not uncommon to perform multiple actions while switching scenes. You may want to play an animation or loading screen. To save time, we're outsourcing the logic to a separate method. It'll be easier to scale by placing the logic into a separate method. Let's try playing our game. If I press the Start button, Unity will begin loading the next scene. This process may take a while. It's not always immediate. After a few moments, the island scene should load. That's awesome. We've successfully transitioned into a new scene. It's nothing fancy, but it gets the job done. In the next lecture, let's continue improving the UI by adding the player's stats.